Hello, BookTube. All right, we're back for, I think, part 4 of my 7.5K Q&A, and we are up to Link Joker, who has a barrage of questions. Let's see here. Your numbers are skyrocketing. It'll only be a few months before your sub count is neck and neck with, really, your only real rival on this platform, PewDiePie. Unlike PewDiePie, I am not a Nazi. Number 1, thoughts on the more literary works of Michael Moorcock that characterize his career from the mid-70s onward. Probably predictably, I don't like them as much as his earlier works. They seem to me to be a little bit highfalutin. It seems like his reach exceeds his grasp. Number 2, when preparing to write a work of fiction, how detailed do you like your outlines to be? For me, I like a fairly detailed outline because I want to be able to know what I'm doing from day to day. And if you open up your computer and you're about to embark on the hour of writing that you're supposed to do every day, and you don't know what you're doing, where you've got to invent as well as write, you're doubling your work. An outline removes that. An outline also gives you the freedom to skip ahead if what you're writing in the moment is not working. If the scene that you're writing in the moment is not working, and thanks to an outline, you know what the next scene is. So you just go ahead and come back. Let's see here. And number 3, do you believe money can buy happiness? No. Well, happiness is a reaction to your physical environment. So money can certainly affect that, right? And money can buy you a dog, which will make you very, very happy. Money buys you books that make you happy. So, but if what you're saying, I mean, I've known people that no matter what kinds of great things their money added to their lives, they were never happy for long, not more than a few minutes. And there's nothing that money can do about that. Let's see here. Housekeeping says, can you recommend me authors whose prose is above the expectations of the genre they write in? If you know what I mean. I don't exactly know what you mean. The genres would be science fiction, fantasy, and noir or neo-noir. I don't know what you mean. Are you asking me to recommend good authors in those genres? Or are you trying to smuggle in? It sounds like you're trying to smuggle in a bit of snobbery here. You're trying to say that those genres are largely dumb, and can I recommend any authors who aren't dumb who write in those genres? And I don't agree that there are any dumb genres. So I'm not sure about the question. We'll just move on. What do you think of Thomas Sowell? Would you recommend him your average American liberal college kid? Average American liberal college kid? I would recommend reading history. Don't waste your time on Thomas Sowell. Read history. Read history, especially the history of your own country. Get to know history. Broaden your mind that way with history and biography. And don't worry about any of the rest of this stuff. The number 1 sin besetting the, what is it? Average American liberal college kid. The number 1 sin besetting that demographic is how absolute bone stupid they are when it comes to any knowledge of anything that happened before they themselves were 15 years old. And I mean any knowledge whatsoever. The number 1 weakness of that demographic is that they don't have any knowledge about anything except themselves from age 15 until the present day. It is the most intensely self-centered and solipsistic viewpoint that I've ever seen in any American generation. They don't know, and a lot of them, the more arrogant ones, say, well, since I don't know about it, I also don't care about it. And that is reprehensible. It is absolutely reprehensible that so many 18 to 22-year-olds that I know now can't tell me anything at all about anything that happened anywhere in the past except to themselves in their own personal lives. So who did America fight during World War II? I don't know. I don't care. It's all patriarchy. Or why should I be forced to know that? Or what? Read history. Read biography. That's the thing to do. F00T says, in your opinion, which decade during your life has produced the greatest literature? Additionally, which century, in your view, has produced the greatest literature? Well, the century would be the Victorian century. So roughly 1830 to roughly 1920, something like that. The long Victorian century, hands down. In terms of a specific decade, I don't really know. But the Victorian period, from the time of the Wicked Uncles to the death of Edward, the long Victorian era is, to me, hands down, for a kind of century. William Fett says, what are your thoughts on the 2 writers that I believe have been long forgotten, John P. Marquand and Herman Wouk? if you like them, which book do you recommend from each author? I like them both, very much so. Yeah, they're very well worth reading. And the famous works for me, either one of them, are a fine place to start. You know, The Late George Apley or The Caine Mutiny, stuff like that. Anywhere you start will be fine, but don't start with the really minor, weak work. Start with the stuff that was well beloved and was read by millions. Let's see here. Carmen Rogue says, please tell us about a favorite painting, painter, or art, etc. At least a favorite that's more fun. Well, I'm a big fan of Norman Rockwell, and nobody else is. He's not serious art. I could look at Norman Rockwell paintings all day long, and J.C. Leyendecker before him, and Sir Edwin Landseer before him. So that gives you an idea of what I like in art. It is definitely not a blank canvas stretched on boards and hung up in the Modern Art Museum, with people going by saying, well, isn't it blank? I mean, how can you call it art if there's nothing on it? Ah, I see. That's the point. No, not really. Peter Gardner says, what is the best War and Peace translation? I have my own favorites. I don't really know which is the best one. What are your thoughts on the new Flora Thompson DeVoe translation of the posthumous memoirs of Bras Cubas? I've read it and I enjoyed it. If you're talking about the brand new one, the one that's sort of making the rounds in the literary crit world, I read it and enjoyed it, but I don't know anything about its merits as a translation. RTL-LTR has two questions. Number one, curious about your thoughts regarding the idea that the internet has shrunk the world and basically ruined traveling. No, not at all. There's tons of pictures or videos of every square inch of the world. Yes, but that's not the same thing as going there. No, I don't think it's ruined that at all. And number two, thoughts on Shantaram by Gregory Roberts, especially for a debut. I thought it was remarkable. I agree. Totally remarkable book. I really thought for the longest time that was going to be a classic example of a debut where we never get another book from the author. But we did. But Shantaram is well worth your time to read, those of you who haven't read it. As a debut, it is unbelievable. Let's see here. How are we doing? Okay, well, we've got plenty of time. DJC Silva. Thank you for speaking up for animal rights in your 7.4K video. What are your views on the ethical dilemma of having to buy meat for your pets? I ask since I have pets myself. Well, it's a different situation for your dog or your cat because they are not primarily omnivores, right? And they can't make decisions of that sort of thing for their own. You don't let them go out to forage for their own food. They wouldn't eat vegetables if they could. So there's a sense of you working with their own body and feeding them what their body will digest. I've seen all sorts of videos and read all sorts of accounts, articles and books and whatnot from people who feed their dogs and cats an exclusively vegetarian diet and have no apparent negative side effects. I've never tried it myself. But you have the option yourself. You have that option. You evolved eating a huge amount of plant matter and only a tiny amount of meat protein. So you have a much greater option and therefore, a much greater obligation. Let's see here. Edmund Burke, the iPad is acting up here because it wasn't expecting 5 hours of talking, and I have a hair laying on my nose that will not move. It just will not. I'm catching it out of the corner of my eye, and it will not move. I hope it's not visible. That's why I'm dabbing at my nose. It's not because I've done cocaine today. Okay. Edmund Burke says, could you tell a story that captures the famed South Boston character of your childhood? Well, scholars are split on whether or not I spent my childhood in South Boston or in Keokuk, Iowa, or in Hermosa Beach, California, or in Nashua, New Hampshire. There's all sorts of scholarly disagreement. And the South Boston of that time, 50 years ago, is gone completely now. The neighborhood has been gentrified out of all recognition. There are little enclaves here and there in the back streets, but most of it is gone. And that's a terrible, terrible shame. It used to be a place where everybody knew everybody else and where all the doors were open during the day. You could, if you were out playing, you could go into somebody's house for water. And they knew you and they knew your parents. That is all gone now. Absolutely. And that's a shame. Mr. T says, I've been watching a great number of your posts and searching other booktube channels for reviews and news of published Arabic literary fiction in translation. Have you read much yourself? Not much, no, not nearly as much as there is. I'd love it if I could find some Arabic booktube channels. Here's a few authors I rate. I wonder if you or other booktube folk may know or have come across printed work by Ben Jaloun, Mahi Bin Bini, Youssef Fadel, Matthias Enard, Rocky Shami. Matthias Enard has been mentioned on BookTube. The others, no. I wonder where the Arabic booktubers are working in English. I don't. If you know some of them, I've encountered almost none, and that would be great. Also, Indian booktubers. I've encountered very few of those in an incredibly literary country. So, I'd love to see it. Let's see here. Mary Tumulty says, during your travels, did you hike the Camino de Santiago, the Appalachian Trail, the Grand Canyon? Are any of those places Australia? No. Then yes, I have. Yes, I have. I've gone all the way to Compostela. I've tramped over every inch of the Grand Canyon. And the Appalachian Trail has a singular distinction for me. I am probably the only person that you will ever talk to who has traveled. I have traversed the entirety of the Appalachian Trail entirely without carrying my own provender, which is kind of hard to do. You kind of sort of need to know what you're doing to do that. Let's see here. Alan Braswell says, is there a book on the American Revolution that puts the blame of the beginning of the war on the Prime Minister of Great Britain? Not that I know of. Probably, I mean, a lot of them castigate the inept, bumbling, political handling of the revolution in its early months by American politicians, but placing the blame squarely on the Prime Minister, I don't think I've read any that made that claim. Joel Swagman says, for the non-religious person, which sacred texts are worth reading for their literary value? The Bible, large chunks of it have great literary value. The Quran, likewise. The Book of Mormon has no literary value. It's a lot of fun to read, but let's not get carried away. The Bhagavad Gita has quite a bit of literary value. You'd want to be dicey about translations. Others, well, I would argue reading, get a World Library book. Get a book that collects the sacred texts of the world and just read through it. These things are worth, who knows what you'll find in the way of literary value. Not all of them. The older ones tend to have more of it than the younger ones, but they're all fascinating to read, especially since they shape your world. Angus Reeves says, a couple of questions. Do you have a favorite English country house you have visited or stayed at, and can you tell us why? I have two favorites, yes. And the reason why is the same in both cases, because I was on fairly intimate terms with the owner. It's a wonderful experience. Those of you who haven't done it, it's a wonderful experience. You ought to try it. And secondly, is it ever acceptable to euthanize an animal, particularly a friend that is obviously suffering and in pain? I know this is a downer of a question, but it's one that has troubled me since childhood. Of course it's ethical to do that. It's acceptable? Of course it is. Yes. Yes, your pet, unless you're very lucky, your pet is, at the end of their life is going to need you to do that. Because they're just going to be, there's not going to be any upside anymore. The minute there's no upside anymore, the minute there's no enjoyment, only pain, only tedium, only confusion, only fear, then it's your duty, it's your final duty to see that out, to see it through. And I'm not 100% sure about cats. I've heard that cats go and hide when they reach this point, but dogs will let you know. In almost all cases, dogs will let you know. There will be a horrible moment. It is, in my experience of having dogs, it is the moment that I dread the most. The moment when you see them say, leave me behind, let me go. That moment, dogs often will show you that moment. They will often tell you that, and they'll be very clear about it. And then it's up to you. They can't do anything themselves at that point. It's up to you. But that's not poetic falderall. That you will actually, in most cases with dogs at the end, you will see that. They will say to you, let me go. And you just have to do it. And you can't waste any time with it. I did that. I feel terrible about it to this day. It's been decades. But I had a dog once, my best friend, the best friend I've ever had in my life, told that to me at the beginning of the summer. Totally unambiguous. He was never ambiguous about anything. He told me that unambiguously. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't let go of him. I honestly thought there would be nothing in my life after that. I thought I would go as well. And I didn't, obviously. I was gone from all the world. I left the world for a week, but I came back. But at the beginning of summer, I saw that and I let it go. I held on for almost the whole of that summer. And that was just brutally selfish of me. There was no reason for me to put him through that. And there were good moments in those months that I insisted on holding on to. But there were a lot of bad moments too. And I should never have done it. So, yeah, no, it is totally acceptable. It's not just acceptable, it's incumbent on you. Let's see here. CM Spiff says, could you explain your stance on Haruki Murakami? Oh, no. Most of the time you talk about him and his fans with nothing but disdain, but you still ranked Killing Commendatore on your number 3 book that year. His books range from some of my favorites, Hard-Boiled Wonderland, Kafka on the Shore. Yes, indeed. To something I want to give the Bradley Cooper in Silver Linings Playbook treatment. Dance, dance, dance. So we're on the exact same wavelength here. I understand your question. So I'd like to know where you actually stand, since you don't seem to hold him in as low regard as Stephen King. Well, okay, you're asking the question, but you clearly know the answer because we stand in the same place. What to make of Haruki Murakami? What to make of him? I don't think I have ever offered on this channel just blanket, black and white, simple disdain. His fans, maybe, yes. His fans don't know anything. Most of his fans are Dude Bro readers, and I have disdain for them, even though I think they're not usually beyond hope. But himself? Boy, oh boy, is he a tough author. I don't know where I stand with him. I wish I did. I've said that on this channel many times, that I don't have a stance on him. Because, as you point out, some of his books are tremendous. Others are just the laziest, limpest piece of wash. And it's the same author with the same work method. His work method never changes. It's not like you can expect that there's cocaine involved or a foreign mistress or anything like that. So it's amazing to me that he varies the way he does. Another highly prolific, extremely prominent modern author, Joyce Carol Oates, the quality of her work virtually never varies. With Murakami, it's all over the map. So I don't have a stance on him. His next book could be fantastic. You're right. Killing Commendatore I thought was fantastic. His books sometimes rank very highly on my list, my epic year-end list of the best and worst books of the year, and sometimes very low on the list. So I don't have an easy answer. That sounds like you don't either. Let's see. Andrew Russell says, number 1, do you think there are too many films that borrow from books, and do you, in general, believe this to be a good trend? I like the trend. Absolutely. Number 2, do you prefer hot weather or cold, cozy winters in front of a burning fire? I prefer hot weather. Triple digits with saturation point humidity. I never thought I would reach that point in my life. I never thought I would say that. But now, it is never warm enough for me. Never. Those are my 3 rules. It's always too warm. I'm always hungry. And the music is always too loud. Or always too cold. It's always too cold. I'm always hungry. And the music is always too loud. So I go to visit somebody and they say, are you full? And I say, oh yes, couldn't eat another bite. The real answer is, I want to eat for the rest of the time that I'm here. Nonstop, except for when I'm pooping. And they say, so you're warm enough? And I say, oh yeah, I'm fine. I'm freezing cold. Absolutely freezing. Right down to my mitochondria. And people say, oh, you got to listen to this. This is great. And I want to say, well, if you want me to listen to it at this volume, how do I go up the street? But for me, warm, cozy fire is not warm and cozy enough. Let's see here. And number 3, what do you think has been the biggest change in how society perceives literature in the last decade, if any? Society in general reads less and less. The parts that read are reading more and more, but the society as a whole, the percentage I think is going down. So perceiving literature, I don't think society does perceive literature. The reading world, one of the foremost changes in it, how it perceives literature in the last, did you say decade, has been purely negative, which is this identity politics nonsense that has crept into the literary world, where readers now need their authors to agree with them politically and include them personally, preferably by name, in their fiction. And if you don't do that, if I read a book of yours and I go on Twitter to find you, and on Twitter you are supporting a political candidate I don't like, then I want you canceled as an author. I want you done. Not just that I will no longer read a book of yours, although that's dumb enough on its own, but I don't want anyone to, and I also want, your publisher to drop you, and I want your royalty deals to be canceled. I want you to die, basically. I'm not going to go to your house and pull a trigger, but I want to sever you from any means of adding money to your life so that you can no longer pay for food, healthcare, shelter, your children. I don't want them to be able to do it either. This scorched earth, all or nothing, you agree with me, or it's genocide of you and all of your people attitude that is the 21st century, has moved into literature. And I hate it. I absolutely hate it. And that's fairly new. That wasn't always the case. Or Norman Mailer would never have been able to sell a single book. Let's see here. Omnipotent Poobah says, have you ever had an advanced copy of, have you had a copy, an advanced, okay, all right. Okay, Omnipotent Poobah says, have you had an advanced copy of the Martin Amis novel Inside Story, and if so, is there anything you can say about it? I have an advanced copy. I read it. I'm going to be doing my second reading of it soon, probably next weekend. I loved it. I thought largely it was one of the best things that Amis has ever written. I have my issues with it, especially with its gestures towards autofiction. I have issues with autofiction just in general. But I defy you to start reading it and want to stop. And that is not often true. For me, with Martin Amis, that is not often true. With this, I couldn't put it down. And also, whenever you do your videos, I'm always wondering why you have what I think is a copy of The Luminaries slap bang in the middle of your penguin wall. Yes, that's an old joke from years ago on BookTube. It seemed to me when I was looking at other BookTube videos that everybody had a copy of The Luminaries in the background of their videos. And so I got a copy, and for a while I was adding copies. Every time I'd see a dollar copy at the Brattle, I would get it and add it so that there were multiple copies of the Luminaries. And then finally I decided, okay, the bit is over, but I still want the book. As a reminder of that time, it forms the general picture here of what a friend of mine refers to as my set. This is my set for filming my videos. And I tell her, no, this is my little book room. This isn't a set, but she's right. There's a lot of stuff. There are a lot of visual cues here that if you've been watching these videos a long time, you know where they come from, you know what they are. And I wouldn't have that any other way, and The Luminaries is one of the oldest of those. John, how are we doing? Oh, okay. John Larson says, why are you not talking about the BookTube prize? What's there to talk about? Well, hundreds of BookTubers are talking about it. It's last year's books, so it's a little less inherent interest to me. But if those of you who don't know what John Larson's talking about, there's an enormous number of videos you can consult about the BookTube prize. Caesar Pizza 133 has 3 questions. Do you ever listen to music while reading a book? No. If you do listen to music, as long as it isn't distracting you, or something that fits the book. Generally not. Sometimes I listen to Baroque music when I'm writing, but I don't listen to anything when I'm reading. Number 2, when doing a video on a book, do you write notes for it, or do you remember everything that you liked or disliked about the book? I go for my head. I don't use notes for these videos. And number 3, do you ever get scared reading a horror book, and if so, which is the scariest? I never get scared reading a horror book or watching horror movies. Jump scares, anything like that, none of it works on me. There's some switch that hasn't switched in my brain that just doesn't, it never has worked on me like that. So go to movies and have people, doing this in front of the screen, all that sort of stuff. None of that works on me. I'm always conscious of the fact that it's just a movie. And fiction especially, oh no, never. Let's see, Morgana Dulac says, what is your opinion on Slaughterhouse-5? It's junk. Did you enjoy the Accursed King series by Maurice Druon? Not sure that I remember that. His last name rings a bit of a bell, but I'm not sure that I remember it. Certainly don't have any concerted opinions. And for the Bean, for my little dog, Frida Bean, who's sleeping right next to me, was it very difficult to educate your human, or is he a smart one? Frida and I are still learning each other's ways as time goes on. But we have largely fallen into a wonderful syncopation. She is a wonderful friend. She's a wonderful person in the room. I've been saying this for years now. It was one of the first things I learned about her when she became an adult. What wonderful company she is. She can be very busy and active, but she can also be laid back. It's wonderful. It really is. James Holder says, congrats on 7.5K. What non-Comicsgate YouTubers do you follow? Oh, I have a huge number. More than I could list in a video. Comicsgate is, I follow some of them, although I don't subscribe to them. I don't subscribe. I think I only subscribe to one Comicsgate channel. I don't subscribe to any of the big channels. Because if you subscribe to them, their victims, the comic book so-called professionals that they often criticize, will block you. Because you're a subscriber, they'll use blockchain. I don't want that. I want to be able to see what they're doing and saying, so I don't subscribe to them. But other YouTube channels, there are hundreds of them. So and what are your thoughts on Young Avengers? It started out really good. I really liked the original concept. I have no idea what's become of it now. I gather that one of the Young Avengers is at the heart of the big mega palooza event that Marvel is doing right now called Empire. I don't know. I don't know anything about that. I'm sure their story has moved on, so it would be unrecognizable to me. But their initial appearances I liked. Arto Disk says, when have you been to Romania? A couple of times. What did you like about it? The people, the music, the dancing until all hours, the food. Did you enjoy, in particular, on the Black Sea coast, as in Bulgaria? Have you read any of the literature? Not many works have been translated, unfortunately. I have read a lot of Romanian literature in translation. I've liked a lot of it, and I did spend a lot of time on the coast. Comrade 21 says, number 1, what are your thoughts on the books by James Michener? They're terrific. And number 2, how historically accurate are they? Very much so. He put a lot of pride in that. He knew that the people who knew the history, who knew the folklore and the history, that he oftentimes would talk with them and get boxes of material from them. He knew they'd be looking to see if he was accurate. The historical societies where he would do readings were his bread and butter. Can't have historical inaccuracies if you're doing that. And question number 3, will you bring back the Sunday New York Times videos? Alas, I will not. No, until the New York Times apologizes for running an op-ed in favor of the fascist military dictatorship overthrow of the civilian government in the United States. Earlier in 2020, the New York Times editorial page editor ran an editorial advocating the military overthrow of the government. And when he was called on it in social media, as he inevitably was, he said, well, I think it's important that the op-ed page of a newspaper express all the ranges of opinions. And a whole bunch of tried and true New York Times editorial denizens spoke up and said, I like a paper that makes me think. And I wrote, and so did a bunch of other people, and said, we don't need to think about this. We don't need to think about everything. The fascist military overthrow of the civilian rule of law in the United States is not something we need to robustly debate. It's loathsome. And you're loathsome for running this. I myself said, you ought to lose your career over this. Not just this job. You ought to have to go into another line of work and never speak of this again. And the Times did eventually can him. But they didn't apologize. They've never, as far as I know, run an apology. So we're not going to do a Sunday New York Times read-along anymore. How are we doing for time? Oh my, let's do one more. John Petter has 2 questions. Number 1, who are some of the celebrities whose book recommendations you think are worth following? Obama, Bill Gates? None. Only mine. And number 2, with the low level of cultural literary exchange between America and China, should book reviewers pay more attention to books coming from China? A lot of them are interesting. I've read a lot that are really interesting, that are really good, so maybe they should. Culture exchange can only help. But should it be more? It depends on the book. The books have to be worth it. But anyway, we're going to wrap this up for now, but we will be back to part 5, I think. We're doing part 5 next.